Today on Inside Utah Politics, public lands. The issue usually divides Republicans and Democrats, but in Utah, part of the debate is bringing them together. Why both sides say the federal government owes the state money. Plus, he's credited for saving hundreds of lives on D-Day, but the Medal of Honor eluded him his whole life. Why one lawmaker says it's never too late to do the right thing.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. You may have never heard of payment in lieu of taxes, or PILT, but it's the center of a bipartisan effort on Utah's Capitol Hill. We are digging into that this morning with state representatives Kevin Stratton, a Republican, and Brian King, a Democrat. Gentlemen, great to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Representative Stratton, let's start with you. Give us a little background on PILT.
Well, as we look at the history of our public lands, we transitioned in the 70s from one of disposal to one of retention at the national level. For about 20 years, through the 50s, 60s, 70s leading up to that, there was a notion of, okay, look, if we're going to hold on to these lands, we need to recognize that there's a revenue impact on those jurisdictions that generally, as you look across the nation east of Colorado, where you have 95 or greater lands in the private sector, privately held, those lands do go a long way in providing governmental services, essential governmental services, and funding education. Here in the West, we're at a disadvantage. In Utah, for example, 54 million acres, we have about 34 million, roughly 67%, that are publicly held. And we love our public lands. We want to take care of them and have them productive and accessible and available for the recreation and tourism and all the good things that they bring. We want to be productive and healthy, but that creates a real disparity for funding in terms of education, in terms of essential governmental services, and our overall quality of life. And so PILT, payment in lieu of taxes, was a companion piece of legislation passed federally that said in lieu of divesting and keeping those public lands in the federal estate, we're going to pay those jurisdictions, the states and counties and so forth, as if those lands were in the private sector. So that's what payment in lieu of taxes is. It's tax equalization, so that if someone moves from the east out here to the west, they have equal sources of funding for education, for law enforcement, for all the necessary and important governmental services, as well as impacting the quality of life.
Okay, let's bring Representative King in. Talk about this PILT formula that was put together and how it adds up when you talk about the tax equivalent of what those lands, as Representative Stratton said, 66% of our lands here in the state of Utah. What's the difference there?
Well, I think the important thing about what we're talking about with PILT right now is that lawmakers on both sides of this issue in the Utah State Legislature agree that we need to come up with a better method for having the federal government pay us the amount of money in lieu of taxes that would otherwise be generated for the use of those lands if they were not held in federal hands. We can't tax federal lands, is the bottom line. So that money that other states have that's generated by property taxes and that's used to pay for their education for their kids, used to pay for their roads, used to pay all sorts of things that people really value, we don't have the ability in the West to do that with 2/3 of our lands off the table. So this PILT idea is that what we're going to do is come up with a better, more objectively accurate way of valuing those federal lands and saying to Congress, you need to pay us much higher rates in the future than you have in the past.
Okay. I want to get more into that in a minute, but first let's talk about the disparity here. How much are we talking? What are the estimates? How much are we missing out on the PILT formula versus what the tax would be coming in?
Well, last year we brought in about $40 million to the state of Utah from PILT payments. We estimate that if actual payments had been made in lieu of taxes that would have been generated, the amount would have been at least 10 times that. It would have been more like $500 million, closer to $500 million. And that's what we're trying to do, is come up with a better way of valuing those lands.
Okay, Representative Stratton, what are the ways you're looking at using technology and other sources to get a better value on those lands?
With available technology today, we've been able to commission and then complete a study here in the state of Utah that's actually taken every acre of our publicly held public lands across the state and put in over 30 different variables to create what would be if it was in the private sector or if it or alternate uses, what that actual valuation would be. We haven't had the technology until now to be able to do that. And you look at in a very short order, by putting in different variables, you can create that tax equalization amount that was intended in the 1976 legislation that was passed.
Representative King, you mentioned we could be up to 10 times that amount, I believe is what you said.
Right.
What's the likelihood of really cashing in on that? I mean, we already know the deficit problems we have on a federal level.
Right. Well, I think that it's a fundamental fairness issue. I think if we join together with our states in the West together with us, and on a bipartisan basis, we increase the likelihood that we can exert political pressure, and it is a political question, and a question of political power. We exert enough pressure on Congress, we can see these amounts go up. Look, if we can increase it by 2 or 3 or 4 times, we're increasing it significantly in the way in which we fund, especially in rural Utah, essential services for our kids, for roads, and for things like that in those rural areas. They really need it badly. So it's not an all or nothing thing. We're just acting in a way that I think is very responsible to increase the pressure, increase the likelihood that Congress comes up with payment amounts that even approach what we're losing out on compared to eastern states with the process that we've had since 1976 of preserving these federal lands in Utah rather than disposing of them and putting them in private hands.
Representative Stratton, dig into a little bit more as to how that money could be put to use if it is 2, 3, 4 times more that we're able to bring in.
First of all, if it's 1 time more, that's a 1% increase in our PILT payment. Not our 1% increase 1 time would greatly impact our weighted pupil unit spending. That's a 1% increase. And so we have challenges in terms of education funding, but we also have challenges related to our essential governmental services. The PILT payments can actually be used and allocated by the state. That's part of the legislation that was passed in meeting those needs. They would be directed first, foremost, we need to maintain that $39 to $40 million we're receiving to the counties as is. As we build from there, then, we have an opportunity to provide additional funding to our counties, additional money for education and essential governmental services.
Okay.
So that would be the issue, and we'll be working on a piece of legislation this coming session that will address those concerns.
Okay, I was going to ask where we go from here, but you just answered that. I want to get into another important issue. This is bipartisan. You guys sit here together on this issue, representing both sides of the aisle. Representative King, you don't always see eye to eye with your Republican friends when it comes to public land. So why is this issue different?
Well, we've had real disputes in the past about whether it was appropriate to transfer publicly held lands to the state or to private interests. That's something that we've disagreed with our Republican colleagues about. But on this, I don't think that there's much question. Everybody agrees what Congress intended back in 1976. And that was that the payment in lieu of taxes program would put us on an even level playing field with our states to the east that have 95+% of their lands in private hands and can generate property tax revenue from that. So I think it's just a good policy for the kids in the state of Utah, their educational needs, for people in rural Utah particularly who are trying to do economic development, maintain their roads, and they're struggling to do that. It just makes more sense that we be on the same page with our Republican colleagues to increase those amounts. And that's what Congress intended. That's what everybody intended in 1976 when they restructured how we're preserving federal lands rather than disposing of them.
All right, Representative Stratton, we have about 30 seconds left. Is it nice to have your Democratic colleagues on board?
We love to work together, and I think that's Utah's at its best when we work together and come together. An interesting aspect that I would say is that the study showed is remarkable. We have up 34 million acres of public lands. A small fraction of one of those million, 217,000 acres, are inside our city limits, for example, the 249 city limits. That land made available would go a long way in helping our affordable housing crisis. We have another 441,000 within a mile. So there's really 3 different segments of our public lands that we need to address, and it's very, very helpful to have the information available to work with them. And there is great synergy, and it's a great thing because it brings out the best in Utah.
All right, we're going to have to end it on that note. Gentlemen, appreciate the conversation, and we'll see how this pans out in the upcoming session. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you.
Still to come, Salt Lake County Mayor Jenny Wilson is hoping for another term, while Riverton Mayor Trent Staggs is trying to take over. Our panel will weigh in on the race a little later. But But first, Democratic lawmakers say the pandemic has shined a light on why there needs to be more diversity in banking, how they plan to address it after the break. Welcome back. Congress has been pushing for more diversity and inclusion in banking and argues the pandemic is the perfect example of why financial regulators need to take action. Lawmakers got an update during the week on the challenges still blocking their efforts. Washington correspondent Jesse Tenor reports.
The success of our economy depends on the full inclusion of all communities.
A House committee led by Congresswoman Joyce Beatty called on the country's top financial regulators to include more women and minorities in the workforce.
It is in a company's best interest to hire and develop a diverse workforce and create an inclusive work environment.
The all-female directors of the Offices of Minority and Women Inclusion told Congresswoman Ann Wagner recruiting and retaining these employees is still a challenge.
We have been working extensively to build more relationships with the minority women and veteran businesses.
The agency said their efforts include more incentives and training at their institutions, but said some of the training programs could hit a snag.
They are asking for us to stop all training.
The Trump administration recently instructed federal agencies to end racial sensitivity programs that address topics like white privilege, calling them, quote, divisive anti-American propaganda. Beatty asked the witnesses if any of their trainings said virtually all white people contribute to racism, as the Trump administration claimed.
We absolutely do not have training that in any way contributes to divisive language like that.
Our purpose in our training is to educate and not alienate anyone.
So for now, the federal agencies will continue business as usual. In Washington, I'm Jesse Tenor.
An effort is underway to get a late veteran the recognition and honor he deserves. This after risking his own life to save dozens of others on the front lines on Omaha Beach on D-Day during World War II. Washington correspondent Morgan Wright reports.
On D-Day, Army medic Corporal Waverly Woodson Jr. was wounded when a blast destroyed his landing craft. Despite his injuries, Woodson set up an aid station on Omaha Beach.
If not for the heroism of Corporal Waverly Woodson, dozens, if not hundreds more would have been added to that grim tally.
Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen says Woodson treated at least 200 soldiers. For 30 grueling hours, he removed bullets, cleaned wounds, and saved lives. Woodson, an African American, has never received the Medal of Honor, despite recommendations from his commanders. Maryland Congressman David Trone says that's a travesty.
No African Americans were recommended to receive the Medal of Honor during World War II.
The Army has insisted that it needs additional documents to prove that Woodson earned the honor, records that were destroyed in 1973 by a fire. Van Hollen says documents or not, it's time to right a historic wrong. He's introduced legislation that would authorize the president to take action, and it now has the support of one of the president's allies in the Senate.
Give the president of the United States the tool with which he can, with a stroke of a pen, correct this injustice.
Woodson was born in Senator Patrick Toomey's home state of Pennsylvania. He died in Maryland in 2005. Woodson's widow, Joanne, has been working since 2015 to make sure her husband is honored for his valor.
Right this wrong, or to at least have the recognition that my dear beloved husband deserved.
Reporting in Washington, I'm Morgan Wright.
Coming up, the growing challenge of housing affordability. We often hear about it on the campaign trail, but what are the real solutions? Our panel debates after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now for a closer look at the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Senator Luz Escamilla and former Utah GOP Chair Thomas Wright. Great to have both of you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Glenn.
All right, it's election year, season's campaign starting to kick in. Let's focus in on what could be one of the more local competitive races, that being Salt Lake County Mayor. Mayor Wilson hoping for another term. Riverton Mayor Trent Staggs stepping up to challenge her. Senator, let's start with you. Mayor Wilson has been in for 2 years. She took over after a special election. Has she done enough to convince voters of Salt Lake County she deserves a full 4 years?
Absolutely. I'm really excited for her re-election campaign, and she's been great. I mean, just the COVID-19 response, she's been very focused on helping areas in her own county, which is a large county, that were disproportionately being impacted. I've been able to work with her and her team. She has a she's not only committed herself, but a whole team. And I think they're doing well under the circumstances. This is a crazy year for her second year. And I think she's prepared, qualified, and ready to take for the next 4 years.
Thomas, let's talk about Mayor Staggs out of Riverton. He will be the Republican on the ticket in November. Tell us about what type of candidate he is and how you think this could play out for him.
Well, this is one of Utah's most exciting races, primarily because Salt Lake County has the second largest budget of any government agency in the state, just second only to the state's budget. I think it's about $1.4 billion now. So this is a really important race for the state of Utah, not just for residents of Salt Lake County. So this is definitely a race to watch because they are actually representing more constituents than any member of the United States House of Representatives. Because there's so many people in Salt Lake County. So there's a couple things that Trent Staggs brings to the race that I think are really important. Number one is he has local government experience. As you pointed out, Glenn, he's been the mayor of Riverton. So he has that local city government experience that will help him at the county level. Secondly, he's a successful business person. And we've seen Salt Lake County's budget grow 50% over the last several years. Because of that, I believe that there's incredible efficiencies to be had there. And when you bring a business person in that has private sector experience, they can find efficiencies. They can cut waste and they can get more and better services out of the money that we're already spending and maybe even cut the budget, which would be a huge thing for a lot of residents of Salt Lake County that are on fixed incomes and just simply can't afford these tax increases that we've seen under Mayor Wilson.
Senator, I'll let you address that tax issue as well, but also you brought up the COVID response. How much will that play on voters' minds come November? Because we saw Mayor Wilson come out early along with Mayor Mendenhall and really lock things down up front. So how much will that weigh on voters' minds?
I think a lot, Glenn, and the reality is Mayor Wilson was the first one to say, mask up Utah. And she made it a mandate, and I know some people were upset, but we're now excited to see numbers below 400 cases a day because of Salt Lake County taking that initiative, and of course Salt Lake City following. So I think we want leaders that are responsible, that at that point she made a decision that was difficult, maybe not politically the most savvy decision, but it really paid off for the health of the Utahns and Salt Lake County residents. So I think people are going to re-elect her. I mean, she's well equipped, prepared. She has a lot of experience in local government as a former councilwoman, and I think she's doing a great job. So I think the mayor of Riverton may stay back in Riverton. It's a beautiful city, and welcome to continue working together with the mayor of Salt Lake County, which will be Jenny Wilson.
Thomas, Olympia Hills, this is coming from me and the way I saw it, a very controversial project. Mayor Wilson was in favor of that, signed off on it. And I think from what I saw, that's kind of what launched Trent into this race. Could that be another potential point where voters will really come out to the polls?
Oh, I think there's a lot of voters in Salt Lake County that will vote based on that issue. But I love that you're bringing up the affordable housing crisis that we have in the state of Utah, Glenn. I'm in the real estate industry in my business, and I have seen an explosion, as we all have, in the residential real estate market. And that's great for people that are in it, and that's great for sellers of real estate, but it's devastating for buyers. And I'm seeing more and more people, first-time buyers, that just can't get into this housing market. 19 offers on some properties, 75 showings, one agent told me they had in 48 hours on one property. Yeah. And the prices are escalating at a rate that people aren't going to be able to afford to live here anymore. So we've got to have a serious conversation respecting local government, cities and municipalities, and their ability to determine what happens in their own backyard. but also step up with the leadership to talk about the not in my backyard mentality that so many of us have in the state of Utah. In other words, we know there's affordable housing crisis, but we don't want the affordable housing built in our own backyard. We want it in somebody else's.
Exactly. So is that an area where Mayor Staggs might have let out that could potentially hurt him in November then?
Well, I don't think so, because I think what he's advocating for, and he needs to answer that question himself, we believe in local government control. I do, and I think Mayor Staggs does too, but we've got to have leaders, county mayors, governors, that step up and say, we've got an affordable housing crisis in this state. We were 55,000 housing units short at the beginning of the year when I was in my race for governor. I don't even want to know what that number is now. It's a lot more than 55,000. It's scary to think about what it might be. So yes, we need to respect local government and their ability to make their own decisions, but we simultaneously need to have a bigger conversation with real leadership to encourage local municipalities to step up and lead on this issue, because we're falling further behind. It's devastating for our residents and our kids who won't be able to afford to stay here.
Yeah, no doubt about that. That really concerns me and all of us. I know. Senator, is it a problem though when you say, look, we have this issue, but don't bring it to my backyard?
Absolutely, and this has been an issue that I've been involved living on the west side, northwest quadrant of Salt Lake City, which of course, if you think about Salt Lake City and purchasing a property in Salt Lake City, even the west side is becoming, you're seeing gentrification now, right? So communities being pushed out because of affordability not being there. So I think the state has a role, and we've been, doing some work at the state level. We need to do more. So not only do we need to pass legislation that talks about affordable housing and how we move forward into preventing homelessness and affordability in housing, but putting our money where our mouth is. And I know we've struggled with the budget, and we need to keep in mind a recession is moving our way. And we're going to have to deal with this. I know the other panelist is very experienced in his previous campaign process of talking about the state budget. And that's going to be problematic for the communities and the municipalities when we have to support them and our budget continues to shrink, right? I mean, financially, we're going to be struggling. So more to do, but I agree that it needs to be a partnership between local government and state government, and we all need to be on the same page moving forward, and moving that not in my backyard away, because that's just not going to work.
And I appreciate what the senator's saying, because it's so important. I mean, she comes from an area where the affordable housing crisis is real. It's real all across the state in all 29 counties, even in the rural counties that I visited on my campaign. It's a huge problem. We're not just talking about a Salt Lake County issue or a Wasatch Front issue. We're talking about an issue in the state of Utah, and we need to work together. We need to reach across the aisle and talk about it, because I think we have differences of opinion on how we're going to solve the housing crisis, but we need to have a hard conversation about it, and we need to find common ground, and we need to step up and make it happen, because people are being priced out. It's devastating for our children. We have the highest suicide rate for kids aged 10 to 24. Yeah. And we just have so many issues that are directly related to housing. We need to make sure every family in Utah can afford housing.
When I look at what I bought my first house for in the Salt Lake Valley, compared to what I just bought my last one for, it's mind-blowing. I never thought we'd be to this point. So Thomas, to your point, what are some specific areas we can meet in the middle and address this issue?
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, we have the not in my backyard mentality. We've addressed that. Secondly, we've talked about how I believe local government should determine their zoning ordinances and their local land usage policies. But we've got to encourage them to step up and to think outside the box. I shared one example in my race for governor. There's big box retailers on main arteries throughout the state. We don't use big box retailers like we once did. In the retail real estate market, we talk about businesses being Amazon proof. Or, are they going to survive with Amazon? We're not using big box retailers. We don't need these ginormous parking lots that you see with big box retailers. Could we give variances for those, to build some apartment buildings, to build more affordable housing by incentivizing developers to put some density in a place that they never thought was possible? Yeah. We don't need to clog our arteries. We need to do it thoughtfully, but we need to figure out a way to do this without government subsidies, without rent control, and without the things that we've seen fail in other blue states. We can figure out this problem with a free market approach. That's the Utah way, and I know it can be done.
I need to give the senator the last word here, the last 30 seconds. Your thoughts on what Thomas just said?
Yeah, I mean, I think we may agree to disagree on some of the areas. Bottom line, I think incentivizing, there is a role for government in making sure that we invite good players, good neighbors that want to create neighborhoods and communities, inviting all, and making sure that we're allowing all communities to grow together and families to be able to have a place to live.
All right. Boy, we could talk about this for hours. Thank you so much. Appreciate your insight. Thanks for being with us. And stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now with a look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. The University of Utah is hosting the only debate between the candidates for vice president. That is set for Wednesday, October 7th. Mail-in ballots will start to go out the week of October 12th, and the general election is Tuesday, November 3rd. Make sure to connect with me on social media. I'd like to know what you think of this show and other issues important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Just log on and search Glenn Mills ABC4. Thanks so much for making us part of your day. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.